All right, welcome back to the channel. This is the Northridge Sports Podcast, and this is your host, Mike Robinson. I'm glad to be back doing another podcast. And today for you, I want to talk about the end of season awards, but specifically the MVP. I want to give my take on who I think deserves the MVP and kind of give a breakdown as to how I come to that conclusion. So, and then I probably won't talk about like first team all NBAs or defensive or whatever. I'll probably save that for another video. But I do specifically want to talk about the MVP award, especially since we are nearing the end of the season, and I think it's close enough to give like a prediction as to who I think either will win, and honestly just who I personally think should win based off of like my personal criteria. And the way I select who should be like most deserving of the MVP award is based on a formula that is similar to another formula that I use for kind of determining who I think is the greatest player of all time. And if you don't know, I'm not even sure. I think I've kind of stated this in another video, but just in case, if this is your first time, seeing me or hearing this conversation, I'll kind of break down my formula for determining who's the greatest player of all time, and you'll see how that is similar to just the MVP, because the MVP is essentially the greatest player of just a particular season, and there's some similarities. So to me, my personal GOAT formula rests on four cornerstones, if you will. There's just basically four categories that I use to determine, based on a person's career accomplishments, their career resume, who's most deserving of the greatest of all time. And yeah, I did do a video, I think, where I kind of gave a little GOAT debate. I don't know how thoroughly I broke it down. I will be going into like a lot more detail probably than that video in discussing the MVP, however. But basically the four different categories, and for me personally, I feel like they're all weighted equally. I think all four have to be taken into consideration. However, if all things are equal, then I do think there's a little bit of an order to them, and I will say them in order real quick. So, number one is championships. Like in my opinion, in order for you to be considered the GOAT, you have to have at least won one championship. Now, having one championship probably won't win you consideration over somebody that's won 5 or 6. But at the very least, if you've won one championship, you can be in the conversation. If you haven't won a championship, in my opinion, there's no way a person can be considered a GOAT, because you've played a whole career, a whole era, if you will, and you haven't at least won one time. It's very like pretty much impossible to win even half of your career to win a championship. But if you've at least made it one time, and ideally multiple times, and won the championship, that definitely puts you in the consideration. And then same thing too, if you're ranking the top players of all time, typically the players that have won more championships will kind of be favored over players who've won less. But it's not the end all be all, because there are other categories. So the second category is individual accolades. Namely, number one being the regular season MVP. In my opinion, the greatest individual award you can get as a player is a regular season MVP. It's more valuable than the finals MVP, even though finals MVP probably means that you've also won a championship. But the regular season, I believe, is a little more difficult to obtain. You literally have to be the best player of all the players in the NBA over an 82-game season. Whereas the Finals MVP, you simply have to be the best player in that one series. So if you have a few good games and you just happen to be, valued more over another player on your team that may be actually a better player, you may actually win a Finals MVP, and you may not have been nowhere near the best player in the league. So, but I do think Finals MVP does weigh into your overall career resume, and then a lesser MVP than even the Finals MVP would be an All-Star MVP. But these are all things that get added to your career, accolades and stuff like that. But also, you have to consider Defensive Player of the Year. Like that is considered into your accolades, awards and stuff like that, as well as All-Star selections and all NBA selections. So first team, second team, third team, those all get tallied into your career awards. And then lastly would be like if you were the scoring champ for that year, you were the rebounds leader or assist leader, you led the league in blocks or steals or something like that. Those are things that should weigh in or factor into your accolades, although they may be lower on the list. But if you tally up all of the accolades you've made throughout your career that you've been awarded, essentially, that would all fulfill like the second category. So category 1, championships; category 2, accolades; and then 3 is the statistical accomplishments. So all-time stats, and I do think people overlook the points per game, because I think that matters too. When we look at a regular season, we typically will break down the stat line of a player in points per game. When we're looking at their all-time career, a lot of times people don't look at points per game as much, and they more focus on what are the total points. And the reason why I say that is because, just for example, if you're a player and you happen to play 30 years and another player played 15, but your 30 years were less than spectacular. Let's just say they were good but not great. Whereas another person played a shorter span of time, but in that span of time they were nearly phenomenal, or the greatest of all time within majority of that shorter window. It's one of those things where I think you kind of have to give like a little balance between the two. But I do think the longevity when it comes to your career stats does trump a person's points per game or rebounds per game, so on and so forth. So looking at stats, to me, that's a category in and of its own, but it's the third of the 4 cornerstones in building your argument for the GOAT. And then the fourth one is one that's just intangibles, which a lot of people refer to as the eye test. Because in my opinion, there's certain qualities that factor into a player's greatness that numbers don't necessarily tell. There's no number you can look at on a piece of paper or stats you can look up and just look at just raw numbers and determine a player's greatness. There's certain intangible qualities of great players that you literally have to tell a story to try to like describe their greatness. And in a lot of cases, just simply watching them, for younger people, if you weren't alive when, like, let's say Wilt Chamberlain played, you either have to go back and look at videos to see highlights of Wilt Chamberlain's physical feats and skill as a basketball player, or you have to rely on the information given by people and players from that era, people that talk about how great that player was. If in Wilt Chamberlain's era, all of his peers, hands down, said he was the greatest player playing in that era, you have to take their word for it, and that has to factor in and weigh into your decision. Obviously, that category, even though it's the fourth of the four, you could say pillars or cornerstones, it is the one category that is very subjective. But I think that's kind of like the area where if two players are neck and neck for their position in the greatest of all time list, I feel like that's the tiebreaker. I feel like that's the area where you can kind of split hairs, and it's where the debate comes in. And that's why you have some people saying, well, this guy did this, but this guy did this, but this guy did this. And then it comes down to who do you just prefer or like more. That's I think part of the fun of the debate. But anyway, enough about that. You kind of get the gist of how I categorize and view greatness in greatest of all time, not just in the individual GOAT, but like if you were doing a top 5 or top 10 list or whatever, you can expand it further than that. I kind of have 4 categories and areas that I weigh into who deserves what type of thing. Similarly, with the MVP award, I feel like there's an MVP formula that you can clearly look at 4 different categories that weigh into that player's nomination or candidacy or whatever for MVP. Anyway, so category 1, similar to the GOAT formula. When we're looking at championships, you have to look at record. You have to look at winning. That is a category all in of its own, and that's just the regular season record. Because when I think about defining what it means to be an MVP, you have to equate the value of the player to winning. There's nothing more important in determining value that a player brings to a team. If he's going to be the most valuable player, the most valuable thing that you can contribute to is winning. If that player is the biggest contributing factor to that team's success, that player deserves the most credit for being MVP. And I want to throw this in because this kind of fits into category 1. It also kind of fits into category 4, but I'm just going to mention this now. You also have to factor in how many dominant players are on one team. For example, if, let's say, the team with the highest overall record has a very stacked team with all-star caliber talent, and multiple guys that are, dominant players, but the team that's in second place in their record, in the standings, they're just relying on one player. That one player's success towards winning is weighs more heavily in their contribution to the team versus a team that has stacked talent. So, for example, like in history, a lot of people look at Steve Nash winning an MVP over Shaq and Kobe. But when you look at it, both Shaq and Kobe were two very dominant forces that led the Lakers team to success. Whereas Steve Nash was like one guy that was clear cut, head and shoulders above any other player on his team, that contributed the most contribution to that team's success. And so him as an individual leading his team to success was more impressive than a team that had two juggernaut players that of course they're going to win, but they both kind of take from each other's success, which is why a player like Steve Nash appeared to be more valuable to that team than either Shaq or Kobe individually, even though individually they are better players. So there's no question Shaq's a better player than Steve Nash. Kobe's a better player than Steve Nash. And if you're looking at the greatest players of all time, both Shaq and Kobe are two of the greatest players. Most people include both of them in their top 10 players of all time, if not in some cases top 5. So you look at that, them playing together was kind of like an unfair advantage, so to speak. But looking at the value that they brought to their team, again, a player like Steve Nash, let's say his team got 54 wins on the season, but the Shaq and Kobe Lakers got 58. It's more impressive that the guy doing it by himself, got even anywhere close, if that makes sense. So anyway, regular season record number one. It's the category number one. And again, I to me, each of these categories, each of these four cornerstones, or if you want to say pillars, I give them all equal weight. But in the end, if you have to add them up, which one's like one, which one's 2, 3, 4, record has to be number one. Number two, season awards. Now the thing is, unlike your career resume, there's plenty of awards that you could have won throughout your career, MVPs and all that kind of stuff. In the regular season, there's fewer things to kind of go off of in terms of season awards, but the main two things that I go off of is All-Star candidate and league leader. By the time you get to within, like, let's say the last 4 to 8 games of the season, it should be pretty decisive as to who's the league leader in whatever. You can pretty much make your conclusion or decision as to who deserves the MVP from there. But whoever's the league leader in a particular category, whether it be points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, whatever, those players deserve credit towards their individual season accolades. And even though those are stats as well, looking at a player as a league leader deserves a certain level of credit towards their season awards. But the number one is being All-Star. And in my opinion, if you weren't even selected as an All-Star, I feel like you can't be an MVP for the season. The season you make it as an MVP, you should have also been an All-Star. So All-Star selection is important. And then we would go off of the league leader in whatever statistical categories, and in the event that you want to split hairs, you can kind of go to some other categories, but those main 5, points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, I think those pretty much cover it. Oh, and then the last thing, again, if two players are almost neck and neck, and it's splitting hairs between who's better in that category, you could look at the NBA's Player of the Month awards and Player of the Week awards. But I would reserve looking at player of the month for, if you really have to split hairs, basically. Because even if a player had like a really really great month, and another player was always like, let's say, they were always coming up like number two, but never won a player of the month. They still might by the end of the season have more overall, stats that matter more than just one player having like an incredible month or two incredible months, but the rest of the season, they underperformed compared to another player. That kind of makes sense. But yeah, I would reserve player of the month awards, for just if you got to split hairs between two very very close compared players. So that's category 2. Category 1, regular season record. Category 2, season awards. Category 3 is your overall stat line, meaning the exact points per game, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, whatever. Your overall stat line, including games played, which is the most critical part of category 3, is the number of games played. So the NBA put in a rule that says a player has to have played a minimum of 65 games to qualify for the award. Now, even though I didn't come up with this, I totally agree. If this had never been a rule, if you were asking me how should it be based, I would have already said the player who's played the most games, in addition to all those other categories, has contributed the most towards their team than a player that's played fewer games. If a player's played about 45, 50, maybe 55 games, and another player played nearly the entire 82, 75, 80 games, I would weigh a little more in favor of the player who played more than the player who played less. Even if like the points per game, or total points in the, well, probably not total points in the season, but let's just say points per game, or whatever other categories, even if those were lower for whatever reason, that player's presence on the team, it could be in a defensive way, it could just be as a leader of the team in a leadership role. That player having played more and contributed more matters more. And then as like an extreme example, let's just say there's one player who has like some crazy point per game, stat line or whatever, crazy number of like they're averaging a quadruple double or something crazy like that, or quintuple double or something, but you only play one game. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how phenomenally you played. If you only played one game, but another player played all 82, you can't be the most valuable player when you've barely been available for your team. And I know injuries is like an unfortunate factor, that factors against players, and it's kind of unfair. Players suffer injuries. It's not their fault. They can't get out there and perform. They might have been great for those other 40 games they played, but if they missed half the season, I'm sorry, man, you can't qualify for MVP in my book. So it's good that the NBA implemented the policy of you have to play 65 games. So I take it a little step further. When we're dissecting the stat line of two players and determining who has the better stat line, I'm gonna weigh in games played. Even if they're both meeting the 65 threshold, if one guy is just barely making it to 65 games by the end of the season, and the other guy is far ahead in front of him with like 75 games played, I'm gonna side with the guy that played more games. Again, just to clarify that that detail. So again, I'm gonna reiterate this: regular season record, season awards, and then overall stat line, including games played. And again, if we gotta split hairs, we can go to field goal percentage. We can go to like 3-pointers made. We can go to some other stat lines. There's other stuff like when you're looking at like player efficiency, PER, or whatever, true shooting percentage. I think I said PER, but per 36 or whatever. Like there's other advanced stats that you can look at, but I would say the basic generic stats are information enough. Unless you have to split hairs, then you would go to the advanced stat line to kind of determine from there or whatever. And then the fourth category, it's similar to the fourth category in determining the GOAT. Just like intangibles is something that I think is deserving to be weighed into the conversation. All right, I had to pause for a second. I had a little interruption. But anyway, so yeah, I was talking about the fourth category. Fourth category for the MVP, similar to the GOAT formula. I think there's a certain consideration that has to be given towards intangible things that individual stats or numbers can't identify. And with the MVP, what that's most commonly referred to is a storyline. Certain players throughout the history of the league have had such an impressive season, whether it's they're breaking an all-time record of some sort, or doing some sort of incredible feat that we've never seen before, or maybe haven't seen in 50 years or something like that. There's certain things that warrant an MVP consideration in terms of that player's storyline on that particular season. Sometimes there's just stuff that's done that outweighs and impresses the minds of the public and the voters. Some examples, to me most notably, is like Russell Westbrook's MVP season where he averaged a triple-double. That was something so impressive that, yes, we've seen players get triple-doubles here or there, but to average a triple-double as a stat line across an entire season, that's an incredible feat that hadn't been done since Oscar Robertson. So for Russell Westbrook to have done that was so phenomenally great that it didn't matter. It didn't matter what his regular season record was. It didn't matter some of those other little accolades or stats or whatever. That alone was kind of like a driving factor. I think Steph Curry's season where he had just some phenomenal record of 3-pointers and literally revolutionized the game of basketball. I mean he stood out far and above anybody else that season just because of how impressively he played that we had never seen before. Steph Curry just kind of, like I said, revolutionized the game in a way that hadn't previously been done. Some other things like somebody scoring some ridiculous number of points or putting up like crazy number of games, maybe games in a row where they're scoring 40 plus, 50 plus, something like that, a 60-point game, stuff like that. Like that kind of weighs in or factors into the storyline surrounding that particular player for that season. I don't know if there could ever be a storyline centered around defense, because offense tends to be favored a little more than defense. But I think it should at least could be a factor that could factor in like let's say the greatest two-way player, a guy that's like phenomenally impactful on the defensive end while also scoring 25 plus points a game, like that could that could be one of those things as an example. But yeah, storyline And then just other intangible qualities that kind of leave room for discussion and subjectiveness. But like I said, it's the fourth it's the fourth category of the entire formula. And like I said, I think each one has an equal weight, although the fourth one is one that could trump the others, especially if there's like a close race. If it's kind of like a toss up between, 2-3 players, but one guy has a phenomenal storyline, that could push them ahead of guys that maybe are winning in other categories. But in general, I would still rank in the order of record, all-star selection, league leader, stat line, your individual stats, games played, and then that category last. Especially because in most seasons, I shouldn't say most seasons. I'd say probably a little more than 50% of the time, there may not be any particular storyline that stands out worth somebody trumping somebody because of it. You know what I'm saying? So, but anyway, so now I want to get into giving like a little breakdown of the possible candidates and the score I'm giving them based off of different categories. I'm gonna pause it for just a second. All right, so I just wanted to finish eating this apple I was chewing on, and then grab my little note paper here. All right, so starting with the regular season record, the way I factor in each of these, I kind of give them sort of like a point total, kind of add them up, and then kind of the leader, or I should say probably like whoever ends up being like whoever stands out as the leader. After we kind of tally everything up, we'll kind of make a final decision at the end based off of all four categories combined. But looking at regular season record, I'm looking at, based off of the timing that I'm making this video, the regular season standings and what teams are in first through fourth place. First and second place deserving a full point towards this category. The teams that are in third or fourth place in each conference deserve like a half a point. So, as of making this video, you got the Cavaliers and the Celtics at the top in the East. They're clear-cut favorites, well above the third and fourth place teams. So both the Cavaliers and the Celtics deserve a point for their regular season record being where they're at, the top two teams. And the individual player that gets credit for it generally is going to be the leader of the team or the guy that made an all-star selection. So for the Cavaliers, it's Donovan Mitchell, so he deserves a point. And second is Jason Tatum. And I'm going to tell you right now, both of those teams, even though Donovan Mitchell is the leader of the Cavs and Jason Tatum's the leader of the Celtics, they have a combination of both a stacked team sharing the limelight, so to speak, with another star player, at least one, as well as just playing very, very good team basketball. So even though in a lot of statistical categories you can kind of look at Donovan Mitchell and Jason Tatum as being pretty high up in a lot of categories, because of the success of their overall team. Just like I said, like the Shaq and Kobe comparison, where Shaq and Kobe, since they're sharing the limelight, there's not as much value or shine on either one of them because they're dividing the light, if that makes sense. Whereas like the Steve Nash example, it was just Steve Nash. Now, yes, he had a good team, but he was clear cut the best player that drove the success of the team. So similarly, the problem that Tatum and Mitchell have is that they're sharing their light with the success of the rest of the team. Being talented individuals, and I'll kind of get a little more into that in a second when I talk about the all-star selections, but so just right off the bat, they both get a point in the category of regular season record, but I'm a kind of spoil something. They're not going to be as heavily favored for MVP. All right. So that's the top two teams in the East. I'm gonna go ahead and throw out the top two teams in the West before I go back to the East again. So the West, you got the Thunder and the Rockets. Now I know the Nuggets is pretty close behind the Rockets. I still think the end of this season, the Rockets will probably remain in the number 2 spot, probably. But it is close, so it could flip. But even if you disregard that, if you look much earlier in the season, the Nuggets was like, they were kind of bouncing around between like 3 and 4, and I don't know if they ever really were 2. Rockets were 2 for a lot of the season, and then you had the Grizzlies in the mix too that were up there. At one point the Grizzlies were bouncing between 2 and 3. So now the Grizzlies have since dropped, but the Nuggets were never like, they were never like the number 1 seed and then dropped to the 3. Or the number 2 seed and dropped. So they kind of been hovering around that 3rd, 4th spot. They just so happen to be 3rd as of recording this video, and on the heels of the 2nd spot. But I'm gonna judge it based off of right now. So right now the Rockets are in the 2nd spot, and like I said, for a lot of the season they've been up there. So I think they deserve their spot. So SGA for the Thunder deserves a point for the record, and then the Alperen Sengun for the Rockets deserves a point. And I want to say this too. So some teams have more than one guy as kind of in consideration for the lead player of the team. And in the case of one team, there's 2 guys that are almost dead even. But there's some other teams that there's a close second to the number 1 guy. And then there's obvious teams where there's a clear-cut leader, there's a clear-cut number 1. In the case of the Rockets, I think Jalen Green is phenomenal. He's a phenomenal player. I think he leads his team in points per game. And I think when I made my like who should be All-Star list, if I'm not mistaken, I put Jalen Green on the list, but I do think Alperen Sengun overall deserved it over him as like the number 1 team from the number 1 player from the Rockets. But when you look at the actual selections of who made it as an All-Star, Alperen Sengun actually made it as an All-Star from his team. So he's clear cut the leader there, and when crediting the number 1 guy for for a point in that category, I'm giving it to Sengun. So all right, then I'll jump back to the East since I'm starting East and then West. So in the East, we got the Knicks and the Pacers at the third and the fourth spot, and I think they're both pretty solidly in third and fourth. The Knicks is the team that I said that there's two guys that are pretty neck and neck for deserving as like the number one guy on the team. I know the team's sort of face or franchise player has been Jalen Brunson, and Karl Anthony Towns just got to the team. But since Karl Anthony Towns has arrived to New York, he has made such a huge impact to that team's success that him and Jalen Brunson are pretty much neck and neck for deserving of the credit for the team's success. You can kind of say Shaq and Kobe, but I know in the beginning of Shaq and Kobe, it was really more Shaq than Kobe, and it gradually kind of became Kobe. But right now, I think both Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns are deserving for pretty much equal credit for that team's success and their overall record. So initially, when I'm kind of writing out my little stat sheet, I both gave them a half a point each in the regular season record category, and you'll see at the end how I concluded that that selection or whatever for them. But and then with the Pacers, I know Tyrese Halliburton is looked at as the leader of the team. He's the point guard. He's usually pretty much leading the team, at least in some area, whether it be assists or if not scoring. But Pascal, if you look at the stats, for the season, he's really stood out as overall a leader, similar to Sengun and Jalen Green, where Jalen Green's like the best guard on the team and probably carries a little more of the facilitating the ball handling or whatever for the team. Across the board, Sengun has done more stat wise and has a greater impact, which is probably why he made it as an all-star and Jalen Green didn't. Similarly for the Pacers, it's the same dynamic between Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam. Pascal Siakam is essentially the Sengun of the Pacers, and it makes sense because Pascal Siakam made it as an all-star, Halliburton didn't. So you have to factor that in. So I gave Siakam credit for their regular season record, and he gets a half a point. So the first 1 and 2 teams, they get a full point. Teams 3 and 4 with their records, they get a half a point. If that makes sense. So moving back to the West, we got the Nuggets and the Lakers, and those are clear number ones. We got Jokic and we got LeBron for the Lakers. So Jokic gets a half a point. LeBron James gets a half a point. All right. So moving on to the season awards. Now the season awards, the way I did this is for each All-Star, they get a point. They get a point to their total. If they were selected as the starter, meaning the top 5 All-Star selections from each conference, East and West, and they base it off of front court and back court, the starters get a point, and then everybody else gets a half a point. What else was I gonna say? And then you could kind of say it's unfair. It's 5 positions. There's 3. Dang, is it backcourt or frontcourt? Hold on. I got it right. Yeah, so front court. So front court is the forwards in the center position. So there's 3 front courts, 2 back courts, or you could say, 3 front courts and then 2 selected out of guards. So kind of front courts kind of have an advantage in that category because there's more selections for the front court than there are for the back court. But it is what it is. One side had to have an advantage, so it is what it is. Anyway, so going down the list, I first took the starters, which I'm just gonna look at my notes. So I'm gonna read off of here so we can see. Eastern Conference front court. You got Giannis, Tatum, Karl Anthony Towns. So Giannis, and that's for the East, right? So Giannis gets a point. So he makes the list. Tatum gets a point, who's already on the list, and Towns gets a point, who's also already on the list. Then Eastern Conference guards, the 2 starters, you got Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson. So Mitchell gets a point, and again Brunson gets a point. So you can already see Karl Anthony Towns and Brunson are both pretty equal in this. They both have a point and a half currently, and then you'll see where that kind of separates in a second. Then going to Western Conference front court, you have Nikola Jokic, LeBron James, and Kevin Durant as All-Star selection starters. They got the most votes for the front court in the West. So Jokic gets a point. He's already on the list. LeBron James gets a point. Again, he's already on the list because of the Lakers record. And Kevin Durant gets a point, who wasn't currently on the list. A little spoiler alert, whatever. Kevin Durant's record in that team right now, like, he's nowhere near selection. So just because of his All-Star vote, he gets a point. Also, I want to mention too. Yeah. So, let me pause this for a second. All right. Sorry. Brain fart. Anyway, bear with me. So also too, I want to mention that yes, LeBron and Giannis did not play, but they still get credited for their All-Star selection based on not only the votes but their performance through the year, right? So they both, led their teams. They were dominant players in their respective conferences. Both were eligible and deserving of votes in All-Star selections. So they were officially credited on their record as an All-Star and as a starter, even though they didn't play. So I think that's worth mentioning or crediting. Yes, they might have been just injured prior to the game and didn't play for that reason, and there were some substitutes in, but I think that they're deserving of getting that that point towards their record when weighing into their MVP selection, even though they didn't play. And then let's continue on. We got the Western Conference guards, where we got SGA and Steph Curry. So, again, SGA already on the list. Should be obvious. He gets a point. Steph Curry gets a point, who is basically added to the list for his All-Star selection. And then I want to mention, too, that I could list every All-Star candidate outside of those 5 from each conference, and give points to each of them and put them on the list or whatever. But in my opinion, it's not worth mentioning them at this stage, because we already kind of identified the top 4 teams in each conference and the top 5 players from in terms of All-Star selections from each conference. So everybody else pretty much doesn't matter, because even if they got a half a point because they made the All-Star team, that's probably their only point, and therefore they're going to be nowhere near the MVP consideration. So it's not worth mentioning them or listing them. So moving on, and you'll see something at the end when I explain the totals in a second, and how that every player listed has at least something, but I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so moving on to the league leaders. Now, I want to try to summarize this without looking specifically at who was what, because I did earlier and I tallied them all up. You just want to see my little note paper, you can see. I don't know if that's in focus here, but there's a bunch of little numbers and whatever. But anyway, so I kind of tallied it up, and I have the exact details on my phone, but I'm gonna try to summarize this a little bit. So in the league leaders, you have SGA as the league leader in points per game currently, and it looks like there's no one close that's gonna top him. So on the list, SGA, he gets a point for that category. Jokic is number 3 in points per game. So Jokic gets a half a point for being in that category. Because basically I'm giving the top 1 and 2 1 point, and 3 and 4 half a point. So SGA gets a point. Also on the list, who else was on here? Oh, so Anthony Edwards and Cade Cunningham. Anthony Edwards is, I think maybe 4th right now in points per game in terms of league leaders. And then Cade is somewhere in there for assists, so he gets a half a point. So I added them to the list, as well as their half a points for their being all-star selections. Both Anthony Edwards and Cade were selected in the all-star. And then if you look at the other statistical categories, I think both Jokic and SGA are tied at like number 2 in steals per game. So these are two guys that are carrying their team, not just offensively, but to some extent defensively. The fact that they're out there hustling, getting steals, and they're both tied at number 2 in the league for steals per game. I'm not too surprised that SGA was in there, but I was surprised that Jokic. Like, Jokic is really out there hustling and doing it all, and the pace at which he plays, his lack of like superior athleticism, he just doesn't strike you as a guy that would be out there hustling on the defensive end and getting steals. So I don't know how he's snapping all these steals, but both Jokic and SGA are tied in steals per game. And there's somebody that's number 1. I forget who it is off the top of my head, but right now, like I said, there's a bunch of people actually tied for number 2, but SGA and Jokic are in that mix. And in terms of assists, I forget which one is which, but Jokic is also one of the top rebounders while also being one of the top assist guy, whereas SGA on the other hand is neither. He just leads in the points per game category, but he's not one of the top rebounders or assist guy. And it's kind of unfair because a big man, power forward or center, is probably going to lead the league in rebounds every year. And I guess nowadays you have like Jokic who's also going to tally up a lot of assists. So 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 he's kind of like an unfair player when it comes to MVP awards, because like statistically he's going to look like the best player just because he's going to be the top guy in so many categories. Like literally he's the number 3 guy in the league in points per game, while also being one of the top assist guy, while also being one of the top rebound guys, also having one of the top records, and so on and so forth. And I don't know if that's a little foreshadowing for the video, but so when I tallied up all the points, I'm gonna get to the totals. I'm gonna list everybody's total. Let me throw this out there too. So Karl Anthony Towns is also one of the top rebounders, and that's what separates him from Brunson. Whereas Brunson, yes, he scores a lot of points. He actually scores the most points per game for his team currently. And he averages more assists than Karl Anthony Towns. But Karl Anthony Towns is literally one of the league leaders in rebounds per game. I forget who's number 1 or whatever, but Karl Anthony Towns is he's either 1 or 2. I think he's number 2, but the fact that he does more and also defends for his team, that's what separates Karl Anthony Towns from Brunson. Karl Anthony Towns does more across the board for his team than Brunson does, and so to me, Towns is like a little more of the, in terms of value contributor, I think it's Towns over Brunson. But anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and list all the players. So Donovan Mitchell's point totals towards the MVP race is 2. Tatum's point total for MVP race is 2. SGA is 4. He has a total of 4 points. So like I said, Mitchell and Tatum 2, SGA 4, Sengun 1.5, Jalen Brunson 1.5, Karl Anthony Towns 2.5 in the MVP race. Siakam 1 point, Jokic 4.5, LeBron James 1.5, Giannis 2 points, Kevin Durant 1 point, Curry 1 point, Anthony Edwards 1 point, and Cade Cunningham 1 point. So if you notice, everybody on the list that I listed all have at least 1 point towards, in term, if we tally up all of the other point totals for stuff, in contributing to their value to their team in this MVP race, all of them have at least 1 point. Certain guys have 1.5, certain guys have 2. One guy has 2.5, which would be Karl Anthony Towns, and then it's a jump up to SGA with 4, and Jokic to 4.5. Now this still doesn't end the debate as to who is the MVP, because there's only a half a point difference. So we still got a couple more categories to decide. We got to look at the overall stat line, including games played. That's category 3. So we're not going to discuss any of the other players. We're only going to look at SGA and Nikola Jokic. The other players, they're nowhere near SGA and Jokic at this point when you're weighing up the first 2 categories. So then we look at the stat line. SGA has played 68 games so far this season as of recording this video. He's averaging 32.8 points per game, 5 rebounds, 6.3 assists. Now, I'm not going to talk about steals and blocks, but just so you know, both Jokic and SGA are both averaging 1.8 steals per game. And then I forget what blocks is, but it's kind of insignificant. Neither one of them are blocking a lot of shots. But then Jokic has played 62 games, has scored 29.1 points per game, 12.8 rebounds per game, and has averaged 10.3 assists per game. Now, if there's something that should stand out to you right away between the two of them, is that yes, SGA is averaging the most points, but Jokic is averaging a triple-double. The difference in points per game is a difference of about 3 points. Whereas if you total the rebounds and assists, Jokic is basically double the amount of rebounds and assists that SGA is. Now, it'd be one thing if like your guard player is basically getting a double with assists, and the big man is getting a double with rebounds. Then it's a pretty even neck and neck race. But if one guy is averaging way more rebounds, way more assists than the other guy, and their point total is not too far off from each other, you kind of got to side with the guy that it's doing more across the board in the stat line. Now, in terms of games played, now Jokic is at 62. I'm like 90 whatever percent sure, 99% sure he's gonna finish the season with the 65 games played. Right now, I don't have the record right in front of on my paper right now. But we're looking at somewhere a little over 70 games played on the season, and there's still another roughly 11 games left to go. So, with that being said, in 10 games, I'm sure Jokic is going to play 3 more games. Is all he needs to play to reach that 65 threshold, and he'll probably do more than that. Right, he could easily be at 70 plus games played on the season, and then vice versa for SGA. He actually might be close to 80. He might be close to 80, if not 80 games played. So that's pretty impressive for SGA. He might end up being 79. I don't know, but that's dang near 80. So yes, in that category, besides points per game, SGA does have an advantage in the number of games played. And when you look at their regular season record, the Thunder, the Oklahoma City Thunder, has a much better record than the Nuggets. So when I'm weighing up the 4 categories, I have SGA overall in the regular season record. When it comes to season awards, Jokic has a slight advantage in that area. When you look at their overall stat line, all right, sorry, another little interruption. Hopefully we can wrap this video up soon, but yeah, in terms of the overall stat line, I'm giving the slight edge to Jokic, and it's because of not only is he averaging way more rebounds and assists, but it's the triple double. It's the triple double stat line, which leads me into the 4th category. When you're talking about storyline, I think SGA has a slight case for a storyline on the season. If you listen to the media, all the news and reports about SGA, a lot of people have SGA as favorited for MVP. A lot of people are a little bit tired of giving Jokic the MVP over and over and over again because he's already made multiple MVPs, and SGA has no MVPs. This would be his first MVP if he wins it, and I know a lot of people want to give it to him for that reason. He's having a phenomenal season. He's leading his team. And when you talk about storylines, I think there's a little bit of credit given to SGA for the phenomenal season that he's currently having. But there's also a slight thing that you could say to credit against him. Whereas Jokic, on the other hand, I personally think the storyline of him getting a triple-double, not that he's the first guy to do it, He's not the second guy to do it. I don't even this wouldn't even be the third time it's been done, just because you have you have Westbrook that's done it multiple times. But he's the first big man to ever do it, the first center to ever average a triple double, and that in and of itself is very impressive. The triple double stat line, I think, outweighs anything that SGA is currently doing right now in terms of just his scoring and fantastic skill and leadership on the team. So yeah, I mean, I definitely think that storyline, Jokic has this slight advantage, but here's the thing that's a slight knock on SGA. When you look at the individual value for the team, yes, I think SGA is head and shoulders the leader, the dominant leader above any number 2 on his team. So is Jokic. So they're both kind of equal in that regards. But if you look at the rest of the team's composition, I believe the Thunder have a slightly better team overall than the Nuggets. And it might be splitting hairs, right? Because I think the Nuggets, they play phenomenal team basketball. They have a lot of key contributing pieces to the team. They're phenomenally well constructed team, and they play well together. I mean, so Jokic has a good team. I just think SGA's team's just a little bit better. And if there's one thing that you can point to that is sort of the evidence or credit to that, is the fact that Jalen Williams made it as an all-star this season alongside SGA, whereas Jokic has no fellow all-star. And I think Murray has made an all-star in the past, maybe Aaron Gordon or whatever, but currently there's no other all-star outside of Jokic on his team, and nobody even anywhere close to qualifying. Whereas the Thunder has 2 all-stars selections from that team. So SGA being paired with another all-star next to him, and Jokic isn't, you kind of have to side with SGA having a little more team support than Jokic. And so Jokic has to be the most valuable player. So my conclusion is that, yes, as much as I really wanted to give it to SGA, I really like him as a player. I hope he gets an MVP. If he wins one this year, I ain't mad at it. But if I have to give a honest, unbiased assessment on who I think deserves to be this year's MVP, it has to be Nikola Jokic. Overall, what Nikola Jokic is doing on the season, all of the things added up combined, he has a slight advantage over SGA for his candidacy, if you will. So, all right, that concludes this video. I've definitely talked long enough. I'm going to do another video probably later on, kind of maybe discussing the first team all NBA selections, and second team, whatever, the defensive player of the year, defensive team. Hopefully that'll be a shorter video, and maybe I'll get the rest of my guys to come and join me to do that video with me. So hopefully that'll happen sometime soon. And I got some more things in the pipeline. I want to give an updated playoff prediction based off the current standings and how I think teams will match up going into the playoffs. So stay tuned. Look forward to that. And then there's just more stuff. I ain't gonna list it all now. I think this video has been long enough. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Hopefully I was as clear and concise as possible. Bear with me. I'm still kind of new to this whole podcasting thing. I'm doing this solo. Most of this is off the top of the head. I know I got a lot of notes listed here, but everything I'm saying to you is, for the most part, it's just unscripted, just off of memory. and no edits. It's like you're watching it live. And in the future, I may do some live discussion and analysis. And if people are interested in tuning into this sort of thing, if we can get a nice size little chat going or something like that, we can have some dialogue and debate back and forth. And I'm open to disagreements or debates. I'm all for it. So I absolutely love the game of basketball. It's for sure my favorite sport. I haven't gone into the UFC at all yet, but I do plan on doing that soon. I just need the time, honestly, to do a little bit of my research so that I'm ahead on current events and stuff like that. So I'm sharing like what's going on currently now, because really the UFC is mostly about what's going on right now, like the fight that just passed and the fight that's coming up. I mean, it's that's a sport that really revolves around the current and the present, more than any other sport. So yeah, that's it for me. I'm gonna conclude this one, especially because I'm getting some interruptions now. So peace out. I'll catch y'all in the next one.